Tell me something about sprint planning meeting. If you get this question, how do you approach this? Now, one of the possible way is that you start talking about sprint planning is one of the Scrum ceremony, it should take this much time, and these are the people who attend it, and this is what it produces. Now, there is no perfect way, and I do understand everybody would like to approach these particular questions differently. In my view, if somebody asks me about a given Scrum ceremony, I talk about 5 things. The first thing I want to talk about for a given ceremony is why do we do that? So, purpose of that particular ceremony. Once the purpose is clear, then I get into what do we do. It's more about what are the inputs, what are the output, and what kind of output get produced in this particular event. Once why and what are over, we get into the foundation of it. Now, before getting into the how part of it, I usually talk about foundational part of it. What kind of environment, what kind of things should exist so that that particular planning meeting can happen in the best possible way. Once the foundation is taken care, we get into the how part of it. How part of that particular answer may define how the overall meeting get organized, how information get flowed, how people contribute in reaching to the objective of that particular meeting. So once these 4 things are clear, I get into the dysfunctions and challenges of that particular meeting. So in the rest of the video, I will get into these 5 areas in detail, and hopefully you can create your own answer for such kind of interview questions. Why do we do sprint planning? The first reason which I see is that it ensures that there is less gap between our planning and execution. The progressive planning which we are doing every sprint, which provides us a clear detailed plan for upcoming sprint duration, ensures that we keep in accounting for the previous learning when we are planning for the sprint. The another thing which I get from sprint planning is it makes my whole team plan and commit as a one unit. Unlike one person planning for everyone else, the sprint planning meeting creates an environment where all team members are participating and creating plan for themselves. The third thing which I find coming out of sprint planning as a purpose is that it creates a clear focus on sprint goals. The focus, since Scrum is implemented in little dynamic and changing environment, for a sprint duration, team and stakeholders are clear that this is what we want to achieve in this particular sprint duration. The fourth thing which I look for sprint planning meeting is as a knowledge sharing platform. So it provides an opportunity for everyone to know about what kind of a development we are intending to do in upcoming sprint. You may have your own whys to add to this. These are some of the whys which I feel are commonly observed for the sprint planning meeting. The what part of sprint planning meeting? So we can look at, there is an option, again there is no one universal law, at the what part by looking at input and outputs of the sprint planning meeting. So it's quite well understood. The output of sprint planning meeting is sprint goal and sprint backlog. And what could be the input in order to produce sprint goal and sprint backlog? The obvious input is product backlog, because you would like to know what are the items a product owner thinking of getting done during the sprint planning, during the sprint. So product backlog is one of the input. The other input could be the inputs coming from previous retrospective or the previous learnings. So you want to plan those items in your sprint. The definition of done could work as a third input for your sprint planning meeting, because you want to know what all has to be considered before you make the one given item marking done. You may also want to look at your product, what kind of technical, the capacity or the issues you have in your product. Sometimes you have a technical debt, so you need to plan about those technical debt removals, or you need to plan your work as per the condition of your product. So you also need to consider the product in hand during your sprint planning meeting. You may also want to look at people and capacity. So people is like somebody may have a special interest of a work area for a given sprint. Somebody might be partially available for a given sprint. So those kind of issues, the people related feelings and issues for a given sprint. Also the capacity which might be coming based on the calendar you have in hand. There could be some leaves which makes you work less for a given sprint. So look at your inputs and the outputs, and the process part is something which I elaborate more when I explore the how part of the sprint. Now let's look at the foundation for sprint planning meeting. Now when we read about Scrum, we usually focus on the purpose and what it produces and how it produces. Now you may wonder what is this foundation part, and your interviewer may also wonder, so I am not sure if you want to share it with your interviewer. But just for the sake of knowing it, you need to have an environment so that sprint planning meeting can happen in its perfect way. You need to create an environment so the developer speaks up. You need to create an environment where developers can put up their point that this much work they can take, but beyond this they cannot. At the same time, you also need to create an environment where product owner can challenge the development team without feeling anything about that they will feel offended about their estimate or other things. So an environment which provides difficult conversations to happen without creating any negative side effect. So how do we create that? In my view, the Scrum values provides us good insights about creating that foundation which is needed for all the Scrum events to happen in their desired manner. So we need to ensure that people respect each other's opinion. They have a courage to talk about things. They are open enough to talk about their things. Now beyond Scrum value, I do find there are other things which helps in making sprint planning meeting happen as per their desired objective. The first thing is the buy-in for the rolling wave planning. The product owner and the development team, everybody should understand or should buy in the idea of that things will emerge as we go forward. They should not be thinking of that we need to know everything in advance, even for the sprint. The another thing which I feel can help in creating the foundation for sprint planning meeting is creating a sense of transparency. So we can see how much the capacity is available, what all tasks are there. Transparency during the sprint and transparency after the sprint planning meeting as well, because that will ensure the subsequent sprint planning gets the desired inputs. So in the sprint planning meeting, providing a transparent environment can produce better result. The another foundational stuff which is needed for making sprint planning meeting happen is the desired skills to do sprint planning meeting. You know, you put 5-7 people together and you expect them to plan, but do they know what they are talking about? Do they have desired information as well as skill to plan the work? Now, sometime you may want to invite some experts looking at the product backlog item. Again, development team should be reflecting on this idea that do we need some additional skill or do we have those skills which are needed to produce a better sprint plan. So these are some of the things which you may want to consider as a foundational element to make your sprint planning meeting happen. Now the foundational element is little difficult to ensure. So there are two things which you can look into in order to create that foundation well. One is the preparation you do before the sprint planning meeting by way of communication, by way of identifying the right participants, by way of identifying the right venue, the right tools, so that there is an environment which supports all those things. Also, the ground rules which are set for the meeting as well as for the overall sprint can also help you in creating that foundational element. Creating a team which can interact with each other is definitely a foundational work which we have to do for all the Scrum events. The how part of sprint planning meeting. Now many of us as a Scrum Master focuses on this how part too much, and that the reality is that we definitely need to have a better how part structure so that our development team members, product owner can collaborate together and produce the sprint backlog. So how do you design the whole meeting? What kind of a time box you put in, what happens in the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens by the time you finish it. So some of the ideas like as product owner talking about the product backlog item which he would like to look into, the development team to look into during the sprint, he may give a briefing of it. So you may prepare an agenda where you have, initially you talk about the agenda, then you may talk about the ground rules, possible things, then you may give a space to a product owner to talk about what kind of items he is thinking of. Then you may have a space where a development team member present the definition of done. You may have a space where development team member present the experience of the previous sprint with the help of retrospective actions and the stakeholder feedback, and whatever the people input he or the development team has, they may want to share that. Now once this kind of a sharing and common understanding happens, you may want to create a one by one product backlog analysis is agenda. So once the common items are over, product owner may pick up the one particular product backlog item. Each team member may be silently or may break into small groups and work on those product backlog items, come up with some of the possible approaches for dealing with that particular product backlog item, and then you may facilitate that, okay, we have 3 groups and everyone has the approach. They may end up sharing the same, and with the help of overall understanding of the product backlog item, you may come up with a detailed sprint backlog items for that particular work. And this is how you may keep repeating, you keep checking on how much full we are or how much capacity we have, what kind of a risk and dependencies are emerging, and you may have a separate sections towards the closing which talks about those risk and dependencies and what kind of a contingency plans you are taking in order to mitigate that, and overall taking the view on the sprint backlog. The whole process of creating this how part, overall running part, is called creating a facilitation guide for your sprint planning meeting. I will talk about some of the 7 parameters which you can consider when you create a facilitation guide for your sprint planning meeting. Now let's talk about some of the challenges and dysfunction which you may face during your sprint planning meeting. And in my understanding, this is the area many times your interviewer want to dig into, because when you talk about the challenges and dysfunction, it shows your experience. Anyone can talk about the purpose and what and how based on the theory or the books, but when you talk about challenges, it shows how you dealt with the real life scenario when you were doing sprint planning meeting. So for an interview, I would recommend you prepare this area well. Again, whatever I am sharing are very generic in nature. You need to go deeper than what I am sharing. And when you go deeper, bring more specific examples, bring names, bring instances which can make this conversation go better. So the list which I am sharing is a good starting point, but you need to create your own and find out the one which makes more sense for you. So lack of time discipline. So again, this is something which you may face in any of the Scrum meetings. People not turning up on time, they are not keeping the discussion time box. So managing time. So how do you over a period of time learn to manage time and also achieving the objective of those meetings? So this is something you may want to look into. The team members start taking too much time, again related to the time, for a given backlog item. So it's like trying to get perfect in the beginning. Now, and the perfection may be related to getting into too much details, or it might be related to that they are seeing the product backlog item first time. So they really want to know more because it's very difficult for them to take it forward. Now in these kind of situations, some of the time, if you organize frequent organized backlog refinement meetings, so the team members are aware what kind of a product backlog items are coming for a sprint planning meeting, that can speed up the discussion during sprint planning. The another thing which Scrum Master can do is providing advanced information in the form of email or in the form of documents during the sprint planning meeting about those backlog items and the details attached to it. So something you can experiment and see how it helps you to make your sprint planning meeting going fast for a backlog items. So the team doesn't break down the items sufficiently during the sprint planning meeting. Now again, the too much breakdown is also not good, but too much high level is also not the good. Now why I say not good? The idea is that if you remain at a very high level, you may arrive to a sprint plan which doesn't get met because you are at a high level. if you keep learning from your retrospective, this problem gets resolved soon, because you would not be doing the same mistake again and again in your sprints. So what you have observed and how you fixed it, it's something will help you make. Now the three things which I would like to talk more is that how do you make each development team member participate well, because you might have some test specialist or the people who know test area more, the people who know the UX area more, and sometimes these people, based on their skill orientation, may not get engaged in the detailed understanding of the product backlog item. And there could be other people who are just shy in nature and they do a lot of self-censorship and they don't bring their information forward. So create some kind of a facilitated structure which ensures that people bring their information, their sharing, their ideas to the table, so that a good sprint planning meeting can happen. So you may experiment with various how part or various flow of running this sprint planning meeting, which probably help you in achieving these things. The another possibility is that you may have a skill missing. So I spoke about it when we were talking about how. So you don't have a capacity or a skill to talk about a given product backlog item. Now ideally that should be the rare of the rarest event, but if that happens, then how do you plan that event further? So you may, as a Scrum Master, may want to ensure that all the skills which are needed to talk about these product backlog items exist in the team. If they don't, then you may put these things in front of a team members in advance, so that they can identify what kind of an expert they want to invite in a sprint planning meeting to take care of it. Many times during the sprint planning, the development team members may not put the enough attention to risks and dependencies. So how do you ensure so that these risk and dependency get looked into, so that you have a more and more better sprint plans? In my view, all these things get resolved if we start using our retrospectives well, because you may do these mistakes once, twice, but if you look at them during your retrospective and find out some corrective actions for the future sprint planning as well as sprint execution, these things will start evaporating very soon. But yeah, make your own list, and your interviewer might want to know some details about it. Now, a few months ago, I started teaching Agile team facilitation quite actively. And interesting thing is, in that particular program, we focus on running these events in a facilitated way. The objective of that particular program is getting skills to run these events, and also as a coach mentoring other Scrum Masters to run these events well. So as an output of our process of thinking about facilitation, it's all about creating a facilitation guide for a given meeting. So if one has to create a facilitation guide for sprint planning meeting, what all factors, what all area one should look into? So in our program, we use 7P approach, and we focus on these P's: purpose. So we need to define the purpose. We explore that. The product, like a sprint backlog is coming as a product, output product coming from that particular meeting. And the process, the how part of it, the place and preparation. So there should be a clarity on where the meeting will happen and what kind of a preparation needs to be done over the place. The practical tools used. So you talk about your electronic tools or a physical tools or a meeting collaboration tools if it is done in a distributed environment, and you look into that, okay, what all tools will make this meeting possible. And the final factor in our 7P process is probable issues. The probable issue is all about what if the product owner doesn't come on the time, what if the key development team member is missing for a sprint planning meeting, how do you handle that? So all these probable issues makes you also plan some mitigation for that particular meeting. Creating such kind of a guide can help you in improving your sprint planning meeting, and can also help your Scrum Master, if you are playing as an Agile coach, to improve your sprint planning meetings. So you may like to explore our Agile team facilitation program to improve your Scrum events.